Thank you, everybody. I'm actually going to have my panelists introduce themselves. Um, so why don't we start on that end?
Hey, I'm David Silverman. I'm the SVP of product at Polygon Labs. We're an Ethereum scaling solutions company, primarily contributing to the ag layer.
Hi, everybody. I'm Knox, head of product on EigenDA at EigenLabs. We're working on a DA layer that does not have consensus and is completely Ethereum aligned.
Hey everyone, my name is Kautuk. I'm the founder of Stackr, and we are building a micro rollup framework that allows you to customize and build rollups from scratch.
Hello, my name is Eric. I'm co-founder of Crestal. We are a decentralized infrastructure marketplace for building different module components.
Awesome. So why don't we let's build on that in the same order a little bit. What's like focus more on like what your exact module is and like what are the key other modules it must interplay with?
Yeah, so the ag layer, which is what we're primarily contributing to, is an interoperability framework, allowing chains to have security when moving assets between each other. We interact pretty closely with provers, so ZK provers and ZK VMs, frameworks like Succinct, RISC-0, and Zisk, as well as obviously the chains themselves. So that's the whole stack, execution, DA, consensus, etc.
Yeah, EigenDA works with rollups, which means it works with rollup stacks. So that's OP stack, Orbit, ZK Sync, ag layer, and also the proving system. So we also have to think about specifically which proving system a given stack is using, which is a relatively recent development. So OP stack supports its canon fraud proof system, but it also supports OP succinct now, and I think RISC-0 is throwing their hat in the ring as well. So we have to think a lot about that from the perspective of security, where a DA layer does not actually result in any kind of trust assumption if it's integrated well.
Uh, for us, I think the best way to put it would be like we focus on the execution layer. We kind of believe in the fact that we should not be going towards a place where we are just copy pasting the same design over and over and just carrying all the baggage of one of the designs to different chains. So what we essentially want to do is give ability to the developers to actually modify their execution environment so that they can introduce new concepts or new design languages to it. The way to put it would be like, okay, if you want to have certain features in your application, you don't really need to have an EVM sort of design, which can be which is a Turing complete VM for sure. But what if you want more customizability, you want more efficiency on certain things, so you can maybe write a state machine that's maybe not Turing complete, but very very optimized for that particular use case. So that's where we are headed towards, and that enables a lot of flexibility as well as expressibility for the developers, so that they can choose to do things that is either not possible on the current VM designs, or it's very inefficient to do so. So for example, let's say EVM or SVM or any sort of VM are like they are Turing complete. You can technically deploy any kind of application on top of it through smart contracts, but it's very hard to maybe build like a whole gaming system on top of it, because then it's like a position wherein you have a VM and then you run another VM on top of it, and that just slows it down, and then block space is limited, so you can do only enough operations on that particular thing. So that's basically where we are working on the module side of things. So yeah.
So we at Crestal is slightly different from all the modular layers that we've heard so far. So we're not a modular layer ourselves, but rather we focus on the aggregation and also the matchmaking for the optimal layers for different builders and teams. So for us, based on the rollup and blockchain modularity, we do work with all the different stacks, the DAs, compute, execution, and potentially other newer stacks in the future. So we are all open to all of them. And in addition, we believe modularity should not just be from the rollups. It should extend to even more types of services. So we're also running kind of a marketplace for modular infrastructure where you can find out how to build your entire kind of infra stack with different service blocks, just like the modular layers, such as like pick an RPC, pick an indexer, pick an AVS provider, and pick a block explorer in order to get you the best set of modular combination for your particular use case.
So a lot of these, okay, so each of you guys are building, I think in large part, developer focused products. Do you see modularity in this context unlocking things that cannot be done in like more monolithic systems? Is it that black and white? Is it more about like the kind of like speed of iteration to which you can get to maybe the same point with a monolithic versus modular system? Like, how should people think about what's like uniquely enabled here? Because there's been a lot of obviously I think the pendulum in a lot of ways of hype has swung back to like monolithic systems in the past year. Like obviously Solana is doing incredible. And people have started to, like anything else, they start to like over-index one way and then over-index in the other. And now they're like, oh man, like I don't know if it's worth all this like fragmentation. So like what are some of like the core things you can kind of ground the value prop of modularity in? It's like you will not get this in a monolithic system. Anybody can go.
I can jump in. I mean, outside of price action, which I think is why people are swinging into the
Yeah.
into the monolithic thesis. Ultimately, I think modularity is key. I can speak to how it's helped us on Ag Layer. We could look at interoperability stacks or roll-up clusters, which I guess is our closest competitor. If I want it to be monolithic, my interop depends on my stack. I could be like Elastic Chain, which is only going to work on one execution environment until they maybe expand their prover in some form. That's ZK Syncs. I could do super chain with native interop, which requires a 14-day settlement, and you have to agree to a revenue share and some very strict things about OP stack, like OP succinct wouldn't qualify, as well as even alt DA isn't considered interop superchain compatible. For us taking a modular approach where we don't care about consensus, we don't care about proof system, we don't care about VM, we have the ability to target a much broader range, a much more flexible security framework, while providing much stronger guarantees than really monolithic systems like a layer 0 or a wormhole where it's no control. You kind of have to go and do a business deal.
Yeah, I would add to that the world is structured, like it has this like latent structure, and certain parts of the world have the latent structure that favors modularity, and other parts favor more monolithic things. So I think especially with technology that is rapidly changing, like for example the tech in your phone, the monolithic approach has worked pretty well because that tech is changing every year, and having the coupling between all these pieces of technology makes sense. I think in the blockchain space, where we're 10 plus years into the ecosystem, things are starting to slow down, and we're also starting to suss out areas where people want that optionality that modularity brings. So looking at Ethereum DA, for example, which is scaling at a certain rate, some rollups are interested in scaling faster than that, and so they look towards alt DAs like EigenDA for that. I think it's really more about the latent space of the tech, and then the optionality people want.
I think I agree with Teddy's point on certain applications trying to do something else what the base protocol locks them into. So I think a lot of things, because there's one thing with Ethereum's roadmap as well. Like Ethereum is moving quite slow, and then there are applications which want to do a lot of things that they aren't able to do at the protocol level. Like for example, like we still don't have pre-compiles to prove ZK proofs right now. So that's certain thing that's dependent on the community. But then again, like it's like a very large set of people whom you want to convince to get there, but then there are so many applications and it's required, and still it's not happening right now. So modularity gives you that ability to not be locked to the base layer and do things that you want to do for your particular stack because you need it at that moment.
Yeah, so I definitely agree with all the points that have been discussed. So one thing I like to add is I do believe modularity gives us the ease of swapping things in and out very easily. So Ethereum has been developed for like 10 years now, And initially, I think the goal is to build something out quickly to prove the point of decentralization and help foster more kinds of roll-ups and other ecosystems on top. But it has reached to a point where it's become harder and harder to scale, just like Web 2 problems and Web 1 problems that we've seen in the past in general, like system design space as well. So I do believe this is the right time. Maybe it could have done earlier, but maybe there were other initiatives that's holding us back, other things that are going on. But now is the right time to make sure the base kind of infrastructure and the base roll-ups for building millions and even more apps on top should itself become more flexible in terms of upgrading, swapping things in and out, and make it very easy to evolve itself as we move towards more scalability.
I'm gonna keep saying the things that my Solana friends say, and you guys can tell me why I'm wrong. So, what about the argument that, yeah, great, you guys can kind of experiment with all this stuff, and by the way, not just Solana, but people who are in favor of kind of like very tightly integrated systems. Great, you guys can run all these experiments, but over time, the best thing, like, there are not that many things that are that interesting to add back into like a base protocol, and they're just going to be added in time. Like, take that however you will.
So one, crazy that they have this thing called network extensions, which is effectively rollups. It's funny that Anatoly himself is talking about, oh, I'll have a ZK validated bridge back to Ethereum and call myself an L2. I think they themselves view themselves as part of this broader interconnected world. And I would say that, like, again, the arc of technology has been towards modularity, specialized systems, and modular components. You can have the greatest mainframe in the world. There'll always be a place for a supercomputer. The cloud's doing pretty well. Less powerful, less differentiated servers. I think that's the arc of tech. And I'll take my bet on what we've seen and learned from history versus some hyper concentrated bet. At the end of the day, systems can't, a monolithic system can't infinitely scale.
Yeah, I mean, even within Solana, there's modularity, right? Like, it's not just one binary. There's a bunch of different components within it, and I think it's really relevant what level of abstraction you're looking at here. I mean, typically when people talk about modularity in this context, they're talking about like the set of different things you might select for your rollup. If you zoom out, you know, that's maybe a monolithic system, with a different context. So yeah, I think like basically everything's modular. It's just a question of what perspective you're looking at.
Go ahead.
So I actually believe in like a multi-chain future where Ethereum like is not the only thing that helps like the world scale. So I fully respect all the different types of technologies that come from other chains, promoting modularity and maybe other principles that can help build better apps. So I think it's important to learn from each other, like what's good from Solana, what's good from Ethereum. Maybe both can improve from their learnings, and maybe other protocols like Sui and Aptos and all those all have their advantages. And the reasons why they exist is that they can cater to a diverse, a more improved set of apps can be built on top. So I think it's good that there's competition. There's competition. That means there's improvement needed, and everybody is motivated to build better multi-chain future. In my opinion.
What about um the timeline to which all this exists on, right? Like, I've heard people say, yeah, you guys are talking about the right end state with modularity and customization, all this stuff. Great. And that is how the cloud shaped out. I'm someone who like thoroughly believes that is the end state. But there's an argument to make that um almost like the momentum around monolithic systems, because you don't get this like period of fragmentation, can gain it can increase so much so that like those monolithic systems and just end up just being the base layer for what might ultimately be modular systems, but you guys took the wrong route. How would you guys respond to that? Basically, oh well, why can't Solana just end up being kind of like a better base layer over time and these network extensions pop up?
Again, I think that and I'll speak from the position we take at AgLayer. We're currently using Ethereum as the final settlement, but we connect L1s, L2s, etc. Like we'll be connecting into Solana next year. We're able to work with SVM rollups. We're able to work with whatever network extensions come out. We're able to work with other L1s, Barachain, for example. We can do Cosmos. We can do whatever. I think it's more of let's look up higher at apps. I think you're going to see the next generation of apps deal with abstracting out that chain design. And so ultimately, cool. Solana might be a great place to deploy a smart contract. But if I'm building an application, there's no way that every single application is going to be just in that one single base layer environment, nor should it. I think you're going to see over the next year the death of general purpose chains. Everything's going to be some form of app specific or industry specific chain. Solana seems to be trending a bit more towards payments. Ethereum is just being roll up settlement. Base is going consumer. ARB is more DeFi. OP mainnet's fading, but they have all that area and relevancy. Polygon's going more consumer or POS. We'll see what the arc of these things are, and you're going to have front ends that are aggregating across all of them, picking the best of each to build a unified experience. And so there might not be a base layer, I think, is the real end answer. And so positioning yourself as such is an interesting long-term bet.
Does anybody disagree with that?
I think that pretty much makes sense, and is our thesis as well. That okay, I think we are in Web3 is in that early internet stage era where people were just experimenting with different application designs, and there were so many frameworks and so many things coming up. But ultimately, all of them like converge to a point that okay, it's a web app, and it doesn't matter what's behind the scenes. Previously, when people were running bare metal and like their own servers, they used to take care of like they used to care about how that application is structured. But right now, it's just okay. There's a front end, and there are 10 different services running behind the application, and it could be from multiple different providers. So it's not the case. Even in Web 2, when you're building an application, your database could be on AWS, your API routing could be on some other thing or some other. But to the end user, it looks like one unified experience. So to David's point, I think that's what we are headed towards as well. We are just early, so it looks a little different right now. But I think going 5 years into the future, everything's gonna get so I think subtle that it's just gonna be very non-trivial to think about these things in the future.
You think that leads to the death? I think you worded it as the death of general purpose chains. Like, do you guys see it that exact way?
I don't think that general purpose chains would die. I would say that they would become more nuanced to like do a particular set of things for application specific front ends. That's my take.
I think my take on that is that we are going to see the mass unprofitability of general purpose chains. And unless they start specializing and extracting value from the applications built on top of them, they will turn into centralized systems or be forced to specialize in that regard. I mean, Solana is a massively unprofitable system based off the transaction fees it generates and the security budget it's paying to validators. At some point, transaction fees alone will not cover a network. I can speak that coming from Polygon. We do what 208 million a year issuance, 208 million issuance of pull for security, and we're getting 9 million pull in terms of transaction fees. We're going to be having, I think the community is looking into how do we instead generate revenue to pay for a security budget, and general purpose tracked everything indiscriminately is not going to be the path forward to that.
I just have like a one follow-up question. Do you see these protocols then becoming similar to how internet protocols work, wherein you have like the TCP layer and those kind of things? So they are very subtle and in part of the stack, but the actual value accrual happens at the application layer, and these protocols are just there to make sure that the application exists. So similar to that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that like roll-up stacks, I don't know how they're going to continue charging long-term. Like a rev share model isn't going to work. Again, arc of technology. Windows was great, but most embedded devices run Linux because you're not going to want to pay an OS fee for a small device. DA, I mean, you probably have thoughts on monetization of DA, but I assume it comes from the app layer and not just, we're going to charge on that base fee. I don't know. I defer to
Yeah, I
others.
mean, the counterpoint to that would be Red Hat makes a lot of money helping with Linux, right?
Yeah, that is a support model. That's adding
it's a
value
different
on top of the service. But the actual like Linux itself is free compared to like Windows, which is paid on the OS level.
Yeah, I think it's kind of funny. It's a bit of a debate within the ecosystem. What is the ideal here? Do we want to build the sort of Linux of financial infrastructure, or do we want to build the Microsoft and have there be value accrual and everybody's tokens go up? I fall closer to the Linux camp, but I on the topic of like where value accrual occurs, I think it's very difficult to say, oh, it's going to happen at the application level because there's this big this sort of difference in experience and relative ignorance of users, which allows them to be exploited somewhat more. I think it's probably going to be distributed throughout. I mean, you look at sort of Web 2 example would be the competition between ride-sharing apps and how for a very long time they had negative profit margins and they were selling the exact same product and they were sort of battling on network effects. Um, and that was, the way to interpret that in hindsight is that it was a land grab and that eventually it formed into some kind of profitable market. So I think across the various different layers of the stack, we're going to see profitability eventually. But that's mostly going to be because things just get boring, and maybe nobody wants to build the next roll-up stack to disrupt the entire market.
I want to add a follow-up to your Linux Microsoft comparison. So I think in this new Web3 kind of realm, there will be many more Linux types of systems than what we've seen in the past, where Web2 is more about big data and data aggregated at a certain company where they monopolize the profits that's eventually generated from processing and using some of the data to produce the products for the users. But for Web3, one of the most important principle is to be able to have models where more apps or more rollups or more end users can actually own data. So I do believe these app-specific chains will become the future Microsofts and Linuxes and Apples. And by transparently opening up these data and opening up these protocol, we'll see more ways to optimize things. And also digressing a little bit with the rise of these AI agents now, things will move even faster by seeing agents that may be building chains themselves and figuring out where to target the different types of users and creating even more niche use cases.
The Linux example is interesting because I think I forget who wrote it, but there was some article that was like, there will never be another Linux just because like they do, or no, sorry, there will never be another Red Hat because they were uniquely able to kind of like monetize like on the services part of things. And like and so that's like one way of thinking about it. It's like, all right, well, this stuff isn't really open source, things are like kind of hard to monetize, but then you look in the cloud and they're like, all different types. I mean, there's like maybe like 100, 200, maybe even more, just services, maybe like 5 to 10 for each different module in this much bigger stack. And like, there's like different business models and all of them to some degree can accrue value given the right business model. Is that how you, and it sounds like you guys are all saying like, hey, there are ways to kind of accrue value to these different layers of the stack. Is that your mental model for it? Is that the right mental model for it? Or do you see it differently?
I definitely think it's one of the goals of crypto in general is to avoid rent seeking in the financial system. Beyond that, avoiding centralized trust assumptions and maybe just simplifying finance from a technical level. But yeah, I do think finding that middle ground between yeah like monopolistic or things like that where a lot of rent is being extracted is one of the goals. Yeah.
I mean, avoiding rent seeking the financial system. Circle and Tether alone are making 240 million a year off Polygon, Arbitrum, and OP, and paying what, a couple $1,000s in transaction fees on those L2s. That feels a little rent seeking to me. Users aren't seeing that money either.
Yeah, but that's not gonna stick around for long.
I hope so. But
I think they have a target on their back.
I think that's true. Like it's hard to monetize like software. It's easy to monetize services. So even in like the Web2 space in general, like things that are open source and like by the nature of Web3, things has to be open source. It's difficult to put a license on top of like frameworks, and that's something which we are looking into extensively as well. That with rollups as well, like you can have rollup stacks, but the actual value accrual comes from like servicing those. So okay, like you host that, and then you like run those systems. then only like you can think about like value accrual on those stacks. So that's something I'm yet to see. Like I'm still figuring out like how to approach that. I think the Red Hat model might be interesting, but then again, to that article, like there can never be like another Red Hat. So this is something which we need to figure out in the Web3 software or like SDK or like framework space as well, like how to accrue value for something which is not a service and just a product.
Yeah, so I think one of the reasons why in the older or still existing open source frameworks that are harder to monetize is you're giving the software, you're giving the license for free, but you're not given the access and also data and other operational needs that are needed to build a potentially profitable either business or project. But in Web3, because there are so many open protocols, interoperability, and the access to potentially unlimited sets of data, you can build many more types of projects and optimize based on what you can access. So then the tools, the solutions, the providers of the software maintainers become the pushing blocks and the kind of the middleman of helping build more business on top. So then they become valuable because now there are more possibilities of building even more interesting things on top. So that's my view of why this new Web3 based open source software model will be much more, will accrue a lot more value than before.
Yeah, just I mean, from my experience in like cloud computing and like cloud infrastructure, there's like nuance here. Like if this space actually gets useful in like a much broader sense to like much more people, much more different types of applications, different types of verticals, you start to, I feel like naturally, as we saw this in the cloud, like you start to naturally see kind of like a fragmentation of needs in like a much more granular way than I think we're used to so far in the industry because it's early. And like if you think about it, you're like, okay, you look at like a cloud ecosystem map and you're like, all right, well, why are there 5 different types of these real-time databases? And you're like, oh, well, actually, like this one specializes in very nuanced ways for that vertical. And this other one specializes very much in some nuanced ways for a different vertical. Or there's like another dimension of just like more or less, you were talking about like support before. Like, so you start to actually get like many more dimensions and nuances where you can actually start to accrue value. At least that's what like we saw in the cloud.
Yeah, but again, I think like where's that coming from? Because like, all right, Arbitrum DAO produces Orbit. At the end of the day, they're not providing the support on top of that. That's coming from Conduit, Caldera, all the RAS providers, et cetera. Same for OP Stack. How long is that going to be where those underlying frameworks going to be able to charge what 10% rev share for ARB and what 5% profit, 10% for OP before pre-services? I mean, at what point are the RAS is going to say, I'm going to take the fee-free option by forking out your open source code because I'm actually where the service provider is? You know, are these DAOs able to operate services on their own? Or are they doing their own RAS providers? I think it's interesting to look over at like AVAX, where, you know, AVAX Foundation has Ava Cloud literally as its own RAS provider, ensuring that they can accrue value off their own open source software.
Would you say you're bullish RAS in general?
If that's where the value is going to accrue at a certain point for the maintenance of the stacks, I think that you're going to see competitive pressure pushing down, at least versus the roll-up stacks, and the roll-up stacks are going to have to cut fees. If RASs are going to, I mean, RAS is where the customer's in interfacing, then yeah, I guess the RAS provider is going to probably push them towards, you know, the lower cost option.
Might do okay. Yeah, so ZK Sync is actually doing a bit of RAS and support, maybe anticipating that a bit.
Yeah.
So I think
Is that going to float a token holders though? I guess is the question, or the equity interest.
So I think it might happen even faster. So I'm seeing like many more rollups and app chains being built by day, and a lot of the builders are not starting not to approach RAS as the first option through some of our earlier research. One of the reasons is the cost and the potential deal they have to make with these more SaaS-like businesses. So with the Web3 kind of promise, we will likely see more trustless solutions. Some of that Crestal is also trying to build. But I think we should not limit us to one single solution. So that's why I see having more rollup frameworks, having more tools and more service providers is generally a good thing right now. Before it explodes to something that's harder to manage with the fragmentation, but that's a different topic. So assuming that the tools are getting better, getting more ready, catering to the developers, and developers are also getting better at building them, we should start to see more business models of building different chains, different type of modular projects.
I kind of want to add to one of the earlier points I was being said. So I don't think like what's like stopping these RAS providers to actually forking or like just creating a fork of the open source software, or like open source stack, and just running their own modification stuff on top of it. This was, I think, done by AWS with some. I'm forgetting the name of that stack. I think it was Mongo, or was it Mongo? No, there was this one open source software. So AWS took a fork of it and they just made it private, put a license on top of it, and then they were just charging like more fees for the same thing. I'm just forgetting the name of that particular thing. And then they the that ended up like having the actual product like which was built by the original team being shut down or like archived or something like that. So what's stopping like the Web3 teams doing that to the other ones?
Ooh, that's actually an interesting one because there are counter examples to that same thing in the cloud, right? Like you look at like how the Databricks guys actually I'm now gonna start mentioning just like esoteric like cloud things, but the Databricks guys like came out with Spark, which is this like distributed kind of like computing product. Spark is completely open source. They like put it in the cloud, monetize as a service, and like every cloud provider decided to copy and paste that as their own service. But like they didn't win. Databricks is like people use Databricks, and I mean, everything I'm saying is probably a few years outdated because I've been in crypto. But like before this, like that was how it went for like 5 or 10 years. Where like there was something about the Databricks team, the OG Spark builders, who were able to actually accrue more value than these like much bigger players who were like theoretically doing the same thing. So it's interesting. How do you guys think about that?
I come back to the OP DAO system itself does not have its own RAS in the way that Databricks has for Spark.
Exactly.
Same thing for like that and I think I'm less saying that like a RAS provider is going to fork OP. I think it's just going to move its clients towards an open source stack that doesn't have a rev share component because what value is being provided outside of, I guess, maybe a more performant version. I think that's more of the nuance there. Yeah.
I think the counterexample that you just mentioned is actually MongoDB. So we used to use like MongoDB by deploying something on AWS EC2 and maintain it. But since the release of Mongo Cloud, at least the teams that I've worked with have all switched to that. One of the reasons are the up-to-date releases that gets updated real time from Mongo Cloud versus the AWS one, which is more long-term maintained, but it doesn't give you easy ways to monitor your database access, monitor permissions, do analytics and other performance insights directly from it. So AWS is not going to build those more in-house kind of newer features for you and maintain it for the up-to-date releases. So what I'm seeing is there could be a possibility that the winners eventually will be the roll-up kit creators. So they can run their own, say, platform or in either Web2 or Web3 form, and then provide better updates, better support, and make that a business rather than a generalized RAS platform.
No, but then that's the thing, right? Like then you create a public version of your own system, which is kneecapped, and then you have another version which has like all these nice bells and whistles. That kind of goes against the ethos of like just creating something which is accessible by everyone, because then you have to figure out like revenue and all of those kind of things. So again, then the value capture becomes like quite nuanced.
I would also compare the revenue model of charging fees either of a single rollup or of a bunch of rollups within a synchronous composably cluster. As I would compare that more to like the Microsoft model, where you've got this great like territory and you're sort of farming off of it, farming revenue off of it. The other model, the Linux model, is less lucrative, I would say, in general. There's a reason Red Hat is smaller than Microsoft. And so I think you'll see the roll-up stack ecosystem shift to it if there's some kind of decisive loss to the Linux model.
Just quickly on your point though, where you said like, oh, have a public version that's kneecapped compared to your private version. We're already seeing that in crypto though. I mean, succinct SP1, the open source version's CPU, but the version everyone's actually running is the private GPU instance that you got to pay them more for. And so it's not, I don't necessarily know if it's crypto ethos, but it seems like it's a product that's willing to go and market. But again, it's not like it's hamstrung by a DAO or some other like token interest. I think like as a private company, it's a more better structure.
So now then my follow-up would be like, why have a public version at all?
It's a hedge.
It's so people have opt out. It depends where you see like a lot of like the value of this stuff. Like I think that to some degree, just like the ability to exit is like really, I think that's like really valuable. So I don't see honestly anything like inherently wrong with like that model, as long as, and it's nuanced, like it's subtle. Like I think that like as long as like you actually enable opt out of like the core, maybe just like non like I could see adding like features of any given system for, or maybe like bells and whistles kind of thing, where it's just like, okay, like nice to haves, and then like all the must haves are like easy opt out in like the public version or something like that. I know it's starting to get very abstract, but like I think that's what a lot of these you know, cloud models have done. Like if like you can always just take your like containers and Kubernetes environments and just like go somewhere else, but like you might lose the bells and whistles or the integrations or the extra things like that. So I don't know.
I mean, it starts to get philosophical. Is Microsoft a decentralized company because it has many stockholders, like, or is it not because it has a certain revenue model? Uh, yeah, I tend to believe that you would need to have the model align with your philosophy, and yeah, I'm kind of more. I'm leaning towards the Red Hat Databricks as the better outcome for all of crypto.
Well, Databricks. I'll actually make the case though that like Databricks kind of has somewhere in the middle there, because if like the some of the Databricks version, like if you buy Databricks, like there's some features that are not in just like the open source version, right? But like you don't have to. You know, you do. I think they take the bells and whistles approach, where like you do get the nice to have stuff and the polish and the support and stuff like that. But like the core of it is open source. So I kind of look at that actually not as similar to the Red Hat model.
Yeah, and just to undermine my last point, Microsoft has been open sourcing a lot of stuff, so maybe the two are kind of closer than they seem. I don't know.
Let's shift to actually the chain abstracted like world, right? We're talking about like flexibility and customizability across all these modular layers. Um, how does that, like most broadly, how does that play out? I mean, like, does that mean the customizability and flexibility will be less important, and who will it still be important to? Like, does it stay important to devs, but like, you know, end users don't care at all about the extra choice, or how do you think about it?
If it wasn't for tokens, end users would not care what application your blockchain is deployed on at all whatsoever. I think we've seen this. We're going to see this like in the DeFi world as example. We call it the mullet thesis is coming, where it's a fintech in the front and DeFi in the back. I don't think the fintech is going to expose what blockchain they're using or what underlying protocol they're using. Crypto, like for example, Crypto.com has like their save product behind the scenes. It's Aave on Ethereum. There's others that are doing it with Morpho. I think it's Swiss State. SocGen is doing something like that in France. And like, you know, I don't think those users care what the blockchain is or what the application is. It's abstracted away from them. Matters for the devs. Obviously, Crypto.com chose what they wanted to use. I think it's going to matter for that integration layer. But ultimately, if we didn't have bag bias, we would just be picking the tech that matters the most.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, who cares like what your Twitter application is using as a database at the back? It doesn't matter as long as you're able to tweet. So yeah.
Yeah, I generally agree. I think there's, you know, relevance given the state of chain abstraction. Like, okay, how do I get my assets to this location to use this application? So there's that. But yeah, things like DA, I'll be the first to say that there's no network effects there. So the user really shouldn't care.
Yeah, so I see chain abstraction as a way to reach to broader number of users, potentially users from Web2 space to easily get onboarded to Web3. Because right now we already have enough or sufficiently more technologies than actual users. So we're not seeing a lot of these newer technologies and flexibility being applied to actual apps because of these onboarding user experience problem, fragmentation problem that we're having. So chain abstraction is one way to get us there so that the end users don't have to care what technologies are being involved. But I still think that all the customization flexibility need to be there in order to keep the competitive advantage edge to cater to the different type of users, keep the whole kind of base frameworks to be evolving.
Just one example that I just thought about. I saw this recently. Someone posted a meme, and it is related to like how we highlight chains so much instead of the application. So it was around like right now the Netflix home screen is like Netflix watch a million movies or what it was like. And the post was about what if Netflix was a Web3 application. Netflix powered by AWS running on XYZ infrastructure. And that's how we market Web3 applications. So that's like the deal. Like we highlight chains a lot instead of the application. And I think Solana maybe got this a little bit right because they don't really like say that. But again, they have just one thing to talk about. So yeah, I don't.
Polymarket was never really
Yeah.
advertising that they were on
Yeah,
Polygon,
exactly,
despite
yeah.
it just working.
Except the name.
Yeah.
Eh,
Well,
that's right.
I mean, true, but I think when it was marketed, at least on the Ethereum elite, it's oh, Polymarket's on Ethereum.
Yeah, most people probably
most
don't
probably
know
didn't
that
know.
Poly is referring to
that,
a chain.
yeah.
Yeah.
Only the crypto bros are happy seeing
Exactly.
Polymarket success.
Do you think that's the case for all? Okay, so like for abstracting away from users, are there any exceptions to that, or is it like unanimously you guys think that no users will end up carrying at all?
Oh, there's a small subset that are going to
Yeah,
care. I
just
think.
by
Like,
and large.
I mean, like I think like a lot of us in the room are going to care that like, oh, I really prefer that it's using Ethereum or that it's using some very high secure, high censorship resistant, decentralized framework. But ultimately, like I don't think most users are going to care. I think it's more of like we need to compete and show that that is better for the businesses that are going to be interfacing with those users.
Yeah, I mean, uh, I work on EigenDA because I think scaling is a huge problem, and if we can just give users this peace of mind that they are always gonna be able to have block space and cheap block space, then they're just gonna like the applications that they're using more, and so it'll be sort of like um, the fact that you don't really need to know what CPU is in your machine, but you do know that when you use uh, a computer with a fast CPU, you're going to have a better time. So until those differences are competed away, or something else happens, I think users will care about technology that ultimately affects them. It's just a question of whether it does.
Last question, and I think we'll have to wrap up. Um, with all of these, so users might not care. They have this experience. Like I agree with all that. But one thing that's lingers in the back of my mind is how the security or censorship resistant assumptions could end up being thrown off in a way that like is kind of hard to foresee, or maybe it's easy to foresee, but like you have a given app, great experience using like 10 to 15 modules. Like I think we all kind of see that vision. What are the risks there? What are the things that people are not thinking about that we have to make sure we keep in mind? Is like if one of those things, if only like one out of the 15 like goes offline, like what do you do? Like so what do people need to be thinking about right now? In that way.
I mean, I'm gonna be biased because this is how our approach to interoperability. Um, we see that as huge risk with the interoperable systems. Most of layer zero is using just trust me bro security, which is a multi-sig, either Google or Stargate. Wormhole is similar. They have their kind of network, etc. For us, our approach has been ZK at the most base level, just to ensure that the asset itself, transfer of the asset itself is secure. Chain level accounting, you can't infinite mint attack, etc. Besides that, we're not going to care what chain you're on. Like that's going to completely be customized. I'm not doing full execution proofs. I'm not doing consensus proofs. Chains pick that. Users got to be worried out there, but I think that like, you know, for the DA companies, ensuring that there is actual data availability sampling, that it meets a minimum standard of security, then, it should be used. I think it's more of ensuring that these companies that are building higher are choosing stacks and configurations that have some minimal protection as opposed to just really weak security, an excuse of blockchain. And we have orgs like L2beat and Grow the Pie that are kind of holding us accountable and hopefully being a guide to the developers that are going to be building these front end apps.
Will that be just one more question there? Like, will that be standardized in a digestible way? Like, it definitely seems hard to see that being digestible for most people. Or does it, like, this goes back to like, does it matter? But yeah, like, how do you like standardize how people think about those trade offs though?
I mean, would you say L2beat is doing that a bit?
Oh, absolutely. But like lower down the stack for us nerds kind of thing. Like how do you, as we get more mainstream, whether it's devs, businesses, users, how does that play out? Or does that not past a certain point, does it literally not matter?
You're saying lower down. So
Like
more,
we
more
can look at L2B
we can
and
look-
like know all of the terms and like we kind of dig into the details of things because we're like earlier, like
I think it's going to come from a mix of like self-regulation. Again, like not to harp on the RAS providers, don't offer a configuration that's like insecure, and B, regulation. Like I know it's the dirty word that we don't want to say, but like if decentralization ever gets defined, we're going to have to meet that standard. And that's going to be the real challenge. So
One more thing would be like just reputation over time. So I have like two examples for it. So people trust like the biggest thing is like, what if Polygon would have reorged on the day of election? People would have lost trust and everything would have gone haywire with the poly market thing and the volume that was going on, but it didn't. So people now trust it, and the next time it would happen, people would think that okay, Polygon can handle that, or like whatever application is built on that can handle that. Whereas, and one more example in the same situation would be DYDX's exit that they are doing these days. So they have that escape hatch right now. So that was a primitive which nobody thought, or maybe nobody thought that would be important. But now that they have deprecated it, and people are still able to use that escape hatch to get their funds out, even when the sequences are not active, is something which people appreciate. Whereas on the other side, if you think about the DGen chain incident, wherein they have like so many issues with Conduit that they are not able to I think they are forced to launch a new chain because Conduit is going down again and again and again. So people are losing trust. So the more time you spend, the more things that you give to people to earn respect, I think that's also something which is there. So you have these primitives built into the system that okay, if something would have to go wrong, you still are secure. But if something went wrong and you could not like recover, I think people would lose trust. So that those are the primitives that need to be in check, so that for whatever case something goes down, you're able to recover.
Yeah, I think people. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm looking at this again from a monolithic switching to like a kind of a microservice, kind of more modular kind of stack kind of thing from general Web 2. And this has already been a problem in recent years where some teams have switched back to converting their services to monolithic architecture again. So I think there will be a point where there could be a hybrid architecture of both being modular and being monolithic in order to scale certain parts to past a certain limit. So what's really need to be done is instead of just writing potential EIPs and other sort of IP proposals for the features and for the general scalability, there should be a category maybe called modularity category that certain proposals need to be done in order to solve the security and unstandardized kind of building of the different APIs and SDKs in order to make it more standardized. And we may also borrow these principles from Web 2 in order to solve these general kind of modularity problems.
Yeah, I just add that people typically, I would say, the layman typically doesn't care about these more academic risks until they happen. And I've kind of been surprised that we haven't seen like an L2 rug yet. Yeah, like the easiest attack right now would be convince people to put their assets on your L2, maybe give away free money, and then using some kind of insecure design that nobody took a look at, you rug. And it hasn't happened, and I don't think people will really care too much about roll-up security until it does.
I think there was this
There
one.
was one, the ZK Casino.
There's one.
Exactly, yeah, the ZK Casino. Yeah,
Well, that's good.
I mean, the name tells you.
that was the real casino part.
The house won, unfortunately.
That was-
All right, that's all the time we
Sent
have.
to jail.
Please give a round of applause to your lovely panelists. Thank you.